All right. Another health careers guest joining us, Samantha Nelson. I used to know Sam before her last name was Nelson. So, welcome to the health careers class, Sam. If you want to give us a real quick introduction about who you are, that'd be great.
Yeah. So Mr. Jacobs and I met when we were in undergrad at Gustavus. We were PE, health, and adapted PE teaching education majors together. That's a mouthful. And both grew up in small towns. I grew up on a farm outside of Hector, Minnesota. So we both had a lot of experiences and just kind of lifestyle that was in common with each other. Since graduating from college, I've been through the public education system. I've done healthcare innovation, both in a government setting and in a hospital setting, and have recently transitioned into owning two of my own companies, doing organizational change management, systems change and innovation. And then the other one is focused on mind body wellness and specifically looking at women's empowerment for women who want to do the work that I used to do in leadership roles. Yeah.
Oh, you're such a rock star, Sam. I appreciate that. And those are like, I don't know, just awesome job titles and job descriptions. One of the things I always have kids do is write a job title and job description, and I'm pumped for them to write that one down. I think that's really cool. So before we get into some things here, I always start with these chat pack questions, and they're kind of fun. So this first one says, if the daytime high temperature had to be exactly the same every day of the year, what would you want the temperature to be?
I love the four seasons of Minnesota, so this is really hard for me, but I guess I love spring and I love autumn, so somewhere in that like 60 to 70 kind of range. I like to wear shorts and a long sleeve shirt,
Yeah,
comfortable, but still kind of free flowing.
I can get down with that. I tend to wear a pair of basketball shorts and a sweatshirt every day, except I got my Hawaiian shirt on today. So
Yes.
nobody has a bad day in a Hawaiian shirt, Sam. I learned that a while ago. As we continue through our questions here, that'll kind of guide us. I know you gave us a brief background about where you grew up and where you've been and where you're at right now. But if you could just be a little bit more specific about your educational background and your professional experiences. This is kind of the first job interview question that everybody gets. Tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in high school, I grew up with a mom that was an administrator in a public school. So she was a principal / superintendent. She did both for a school district in Western Minnesota. So I grew up watching her make a lot of really difficult decisions and make a lot of improvements and changes in her school district that a lot of people I didn't know at the time, but as an adult now, I know that most other school administrators would never have the courage or the tenacity to do. So growing up, I never realized that I was living in the same house as a female innovator, an educational innovator, someone trying to change public education so that it was always focused on what's best for the students instead of what's easy for administrators or what's easy for teachers. So, I remember stories when I was growing up about my mom was a teacher first, but she transitioned into administration, and she would come home and like talk about stories about she was in so-and-so's classroom and one of the kids came up to her and just said, "How come you're always wandering around our school building?" Like they thought she was just a community member that came in to volunteer. And that's always a memorable story because I think in schools, most kids don't even know who their superintendent is. A lot of kids know their principal or a dean if they've gotten in trouble or if they're really good kids, one or the other. But I always found it so fascinating that every kid in her building and the other buildings, like she was based in the high school, but all of the kids knew her, all of the teachers knew her, custodians, paraprofessionals, everybody knew who she was. And some of them didn't know what she did there, even though technically she was at the top of the hierarchy. She was the head honcho, right? And I bring that up just because I feel like one of my goals in going through college and then getting into a professional setting was to be like that, to be a leader that could lead from a lot of different dimensions and a lot of different levels and layers. I can go out to community meetings. I could be with parents and students in a special education meeting and look professional enough that people know I'm there to support and advocate for them, but not being so intimidating and threatening that they assume I'm the bad guy and I'm the administrator. So I always had that model and that kind of a vision in my head for what I wanted to be. And in high school, I never, ever, ever wanted to be a teacher or an educator, because in my family, everybody was either in agriculture, they either farmed, or they went into education. And I just wanted to do something different, and that's just always how I've been. But I got to Gustavus, and I was actually exploring some programs out in Colorado to do pediatric cancer rehab. And I was doing career explorations with someone named Heather Banks, and she introduced me eventually to her husband, Aaron, Dr. Aaron Banks, who was I think probably our first professor in the health and exercise science department. And he and another professor, Dr. Bonnie Ryman, made such a huge impact on me the first time I met them, because they told me that with my background and my passions, I would be a great physical education and health education teacher. And I just kind of stared at them like I was an elite athlete in high school, yet I was one of the kids that would do anything to get out of Phi Ed. I hated health class. We had these awful brown textbooks that were published in 1979. Like, why do I remember things like that? Because I think it's so ridiculously horrible, right? Our school couldn't invest in us enough to get us a new textbook.
Yeah.
And Phi Ed was all about like upstairs, run laps. You have 2 minutes to run whatever distance. Like, no, I hate this. This is awful. It's like punishment. Never, ever, ever was Phi Ed fun and enjoyable and about lifelong movement. So when I met those two professors, this world of advocacy and innovation and systems change was ignited in me. Again, with the same theme of what my mom had modeled for me. And that's the theme that still is carried out in what I do right now. So at Gustavus, we always had the option to go present and go do advocacy work with our professors. So when I was a freshman, I started doing presentations in professional settings to other professionals, and I was only just beginning my schooling, right? So I found these really important, profound connections with educators from around the US and medical professionals from around the US that came to Phi Ed and health conferences. That sounds crazy. Like, why would a physician come to hang out with Phi Ed teachers? But that's the world that we had our start in. And I can never thank our professors in that department enough for that. Because when I started teaching, I had the opportunity then to start leading pilot projects in 2 different school districts that I worked at. So I was teaching Phi Ed, health education, adapted physical education. I coached 3 seasons, and I ran summer school plus community ed and rec, right? All of these things. On top of that, I was doing innovation projects. Looking at the first district I was in, we were looking at how we could bring theater, art, and movement into every classroom and bring curriculum to life, so that instead of lecturing, instead of looking at PowerPoints, instead of reading from a textbook and then rewriting what you just read, you'd be up and you'd be moving and enacting what you were learning. Because we know it with neuroscience, like part of what we learned at Gustavus, movement actually takes the learning to a deeper level. We don't need to do it over and over and over and over and over. We need repetition with depth. And the depth is what's so important, setting the context for the learning. I moved from that position into another teaching job doing similar stuff, but I was doing an innovation project with Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we were looking in our middle school at how health equity impacted student learning, but also how it impacted the performance and the wellness of teachers and other staff members. So from that job, I got connected to some other people at Blue Cross that were doing some bigger kinds of projects, some more profound, one-of-a-kind, first time ever in the US kind of research projects out in the community. So I left the school system and I went into, it was a county-based system. A whole bunch of counties got together and they said, we want to become an accountable communities for health model, which is technically usually like a hospital or a healthcare model. But these counties got together and they said, we aren't a hospital. We don't provide direct services like doctors and nurses do, but we want to see if we can figure out how to make our communities healthier, how we can decrease insurance costs and healthcare costs without actually being a doctor, without being a healthcare provider. So we looked at things like community health workers. How could somebody that can do health education and advocacy and run community learning groups go out into the community and educate people and help change policies across the community? Things like making sure we have sidewalks on our streets so that you can safely walk places in your community instead of never walking because you're afraid you're going to get run over by a car. Or making sure that this might be an extreme and somewhat controversial, but vending machines in schools, right? If you have a vending machine, what's in the vending machine? Can it be on all day? Should it be off? Should it even be there? Questions like that. And always looking at, I've never thought about it until just this morning. I was thinking about kind of the tagline of that work is, how do we make the healthy choice the easy choice? And I bring that up because what I'm doing right now is more about setting the context for just being healthy. Instead of you have choice A, choice B, let's make choice B difficult to get so that you have to choose A. And it's kind of like rat psychology and not very humanistic. So that was kind of the work. That's like the healthcare model of how do we get people to be healthier? We force that choice to be the easiest choice instead of the one that you want and you desire because you're passionate about it. So all of that work started to connect then with how healthcare professionals like a CEO, a CFO, finance director at a hospital or a clinic system, along with their doctors and their nurses, understood the way that their patients and their communities wanted to experience healthcare, right? So when you go into a clinic and you're in a smaller community where everybody knows you, how is it that you want to be greeted when you go back and you get roomed by a nurse, aka you walk down the hallway and they're taking your weight and your height and your blood pressure and all that stuff? That's called rooming. When they're doing that process, can other people see and hear all of these measurements? When you go into the room, are you being treated like a person, or are you being treated like we have to get through this checklist and you're just another thing I need to file through my system? So that took me from this government or county-based project into an actual hospital setting. So there was like a communications position that opened up in what's called a critical access hospital. And critical access means that usually in rural communities, very small, disparate, where people are spread out really far, a critical access hospital is like the first line of healthcare. Right? It's not set up for you to, if you've had some kind of traumatic experience, to go through the emergency room and then stay there for months on end. It's meant for you to be triaged and then determine if you can go home or if you need to get sent somewhere else that has more specialty care. So I was working in a space that had critical access hospital, designated rural health clinic, which means like where you'd get your daily checkups. If you have strep throat or something like that, you'd go to the clinic. And then we also had world-class robotic surgery and world-class imaging because we had a really, really creative and innovative CEO at the time. So we had this really amazing healthcare system in the middle of Renville County, teeny tiny, well, population-wise, it's a tiny county. Geography, it's relatively large. But anyhow, there was a position that came open for like communications and marketing. So I went to them and I said, here's what I do. It's not really marketing, but like I set up a nonprofit that covers 12 counties and it's doing these things and it's successful. And I came from this other unique healthcare model that only 4 other communities in the US are doing, and this is how successful it was. So going to a hospital, then I said, I'd like to try doing this inside of a system instead of just based in a community. I want to marry the two so that a healthcare system actually talks to public health and dentists and chiropractors and the people who live here that are experiencing care from all of these different people. Because we know that healthcare isn't just, I'm going to go get my annual sports physical, right? We know that health goes deeper, and it's about how do I think when I wake up in the morning about the way I look? Because we know our thoughts impact our immune system and our physiology and our endocrine system and everything. It's all interconnected.
Yeah. So it sounds like you've done a tremendous job of like really embracing the holistic health approach.
Yes.
And, you know, back to our health education background, the dimensions of wellness really seem to have come together, and you have like created this awesome job that's doing tremendous work educating people on the dimensions of wellness, and you've really taken it to the next level. So I just think that's awesome. So what I've heard, a couple of things that I have written down here, Sam. The one I keep underlining is healthy risks, because as I'm thinking about your career, you know, you had a traditional education degree, you've got a teaching license, and you started down a really similar path that I am currently on. And I just think about myself, and I've kind of stayed on this track. How did you like get to the point where you're like, I'm going to take this healthy risk, and I'm going to jump off the teaching bandwagon and take my skills and my thoughts and what I want to do and you know, jump into something that's maybe different or maybe a little bit uncomfortable right away? Can you just talk about that process?
Yeah, so I'd say all of these healthy risks were caused or inspired by dissatisfaction, right? Dissatisfaction in how teaching was impacting students and teachers. Dissatisfaction in how healthcare was delivered by providers, but also how healthcare is perceived by general people. Dissatisfaction in how public health and government provide health and safe spaces for community members. And all of it eventually comes down to dissatisfaction in the systems that serve people, looking at people more like a file that needs to go into a file cabinet and get some boxes checked on it, instead of individual human beings who have really unique needs, right? So looking at people as a reductionistic, like you are diabetes because you have diabetes, instead of you are Mr. Jacobs and you live on a farm and you have 3 kids and right? Of course, none of that's real, but as an example, right? I know you as a human instead of looking at you through the lens of you are diabetes. Or you are the star football player in my class who's also on NHS, and like actually knowing people, knowing the context. And I think that's what systems fail to do, is understand and lead from context and culture. It's just all about the reductionistic, smallest kind of remedial thing.
So it kind of seems like what you're doing here is you identified a problem. So you, instead of being just a problem identifier, there's a lot of people that can point at something and say, I don't like this, I disagree with this. You're doing something about it, and to the point where you've turned it into a career and a job. And I think that's really, really cool. So I appreciate the heck out of that. You mentioned these things called innovation projects. I guess I haven't really heard that term before. But can you just tell us about those innovation projects? And is that something that you continue to seek out? Because you mentioned that you were taking those on as a teacher, but is that still something that you're seeking out?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so interesting. When I was last year, I started some advanced training at Minnesota School of Public Health for a master's in healthcare administration on top of my master's in educational leadership. And the whole first, we did orientation on campus for 8 days straight. So it was an 8-day intensive talking about human-centered design and innovation. And it was fun for me because I had already been doing that work for 6 or 7 years. And none of these, like it was healthcare administrators for massive systems and these world-class physicians that had no clue what any of this meant. So an innovation project, as we defined it through that coursework, was just something new in a specific setting or context, right? So an innovation project, let's say at your school, an innovation project, if you don't have 10 minutes of movement every single hour and we bring that to your school, that's an innovation because you've never done it before. The school down the road might be doing it, so to them it's not innovation. So it's something new that has an intentional positive wellness effect for the future. And it's not just about making a change to make a change. It's about making a change that will affect, like you said before, these different dimensions. So it's going to impact student performance. It's going to impact teacher health. It's going to impact the finances of the district. So the intention behind it is multifaceted. It's not just, hey, this would be a fun thing to do. It's about, we see a huge issue. What's a simple solution that would fix it? Because we don't need any more complexity and complication in any of the work that we do or in any of our systems. They're already messed up enough the way they are.
Yeah.
So how do you find something creative, something engaging, and ultimately something that's going to be well for people?
Another word I've heard you mention a couple of times, and it was actually the first word that comes to mind when I think about Samantha Broderious, is advocacy. So can you just tell us about yourself as an advocate and how, again, you've turned that into a really big part of your job, I think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think advocacy the idea of advocacy has changed and transformed over time. So when I first learned about advocacy, it literally meant going to the state or the US Capitol and meeting with different representatives to tell stories and share data about why funding needs to be allocated in different places, why policies need to be written certain ways. And that's still incredibly, incredibly important. But I feel like a big part of advocacy that's missing for the general public is agency, personal agency, and the power that we all have to actually make a difference. So advocacy started for me as going and asking other people to make things happen so that our world can be better. And then I started to realize that actually we're all put in positions and we all have skills inside of us that if we just continue discovering and developing them, we can have as much or more of an impact in the world than the government might have, right? So that's really the lens I came from, is advocacy started as changing the government. And now it's this, again, a multifaceted, if I change myself, what can I do in the world around me? Instead of waiting for somebody else to do it externally.
Yeah, I mean, if we all do better, we all do better, right? So that's kind of what I was thinking about as you were talking about that. I think that's a great way to describe advocacy. I'm going to take a question off my list now after I jotted down a few notes and we took our conversation kind of sideways. But Princeton High School, I know we talked about this before we started recording, but I told you that Princeton High School partnered with a handful of organizations in the community to identify the skills that they're looking for from potential employers. And then one of our jobs as educators in the Princeton Public Schools is to explicitly and implicitly teach these soft skills. They're all soft skills. So it's not about, knowing how to use a spreadsheet or run a machine or do any of those hard skills, but the soft skills we identified were number one, communication and collaboration. They kind of lumped those two together. Number two, teamwork. Number three, self-management. I call it discipline, self-management, I think are similar. Number four, critical thinking, and number five, accountability. So if you could kind of tell us about how you yourself have developed those soft skills and, what you see as a professional for how other people use those soft skills
Mm-hmm.
or need to develop those soft skills maybe.
Yeah. Well, first, communication stands out, and I don't know what it is, but I think a lot about mentors that I've worked with that point things out about millennials, because that's what we are. That's what I am. Specifically, I have one mentor that always talks about texting and email as the digital telegraph, and he always says, we've advanced quite a bit beyond the telegraph. So stop digitally telegraphing me and pick up the damn phone. Pardon my language there, but pick up the phone and call me. Or if you need something, FaceTime or get on some kind of a video call so we can actually communicate clearly, articulately, seeing each other or hearing the tone in each other's voices. So the ability to, like, if I have a problem or a question, pick up the phone and call. Drive over somewhere and see a person face to face instead of sending a note. Can I come over in 20 minutes, blah, 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 and they're doing their job. So just like show up and be authentic. Accountability, I think, is also another huge thing because it's so easy and so prevalent in our society and culture to pass the buck off to somebody else on what needs to get done. Like you said before, it's really easy to identify problems, but if you're going to identify it, you also own the responsibility of at least coming up with one solution. If you can't even come up with one, then don't even mention the problem, right? If you're not going to do something about it, then don't even talk about it. Don't bring it out into the rest of the world as if it's someone else's issue, because you can do something. So I think those two are huge. And then collaboration also really, really stands out. I think about so many grant projects that I've worked on and collaborations and communities that I've run. And very quickly, I can identify in my mind the people who think about quid pro quo or an eye for an eye, right? I expect, if I give something, I expect something back, as opposed to the opposition, which is aliquid nihil, which is something for nothing. I'm willing to contribute without expecting something back from you, just because I know that it's going to be better for the world. And eventually something good will come back to me, but it's not an expectation or transactional. It's always, collaboration has to be transformational, right? Otherwise it's, I don't know, I should just pay you $50 to do a job for me. Yeah. And then what's the meaning? What's the impact? And without the meaning and the impact and the intention, whatever, right? Yeah. That's great. And not to say that we shouldn't get paid for services that we do, but again, going back to the idea of collaboration, there's got to be some kind of transformation happening and some meaning that comes with it all. And showing up to actually care, not just showing up because it looks good in the community. I've seen the healthcare careers class I helped with last year, actually. I'll never forget, I had a student who was like the coolest kid in school. He handed in a draft resume and he had 2 pages of service hours listed out, right? So it was like helping with the blood drive at the hospital, 8 hours, doing this thing, 4 hours, and then totaled up for an unbelievable amount of hours that he did things. And I gave it back to him and I said, I'm going to challenge you to go back and write these as impact statements, right? So the collaboration that you did with the community, did you do those things just for hours on your resume? Or did you do them to help your community and do something? What did you learn here? What was the purpose? And if you're not doing it for that reason, it's not collaboration and it's not helping anyone. It's just selfish to go make yourself look better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great thing to point out, especially to these high school kids that I'm going to see in class. I think that'd be a great lesson for them to take away. You know, are you doing something just to put it on your resume, or are you doing something to make an impact? I think that's a really powerful thing, especially in a culture that these kids are growing up where, you know, it might be fashionable to take a picture of you volunteering and putting it on Instagram so you can get 600 likes or whatever. But that's completely the opposite of you know, being a servant is a term I used a lot. As a head basketball coach. We talked a lot about servant learning and doing things because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect something back. And so again, personally, that's why I've appreciated you so much, Sam, is because I've asked you for a lot of favors. This is one of them. You know what we're doing right now. You're contributing to part of my health careers class, and you were one of the first people that I asked to collaborate with when this class started. 4 years ago. So I have a really strong appreciation for your attitude about that, because you haven't gotten anything in return, and I've gotten a whole bunch of things in return. So I appreciate the heck out of that. So maybe one day I'll be able to return the favor.
You are. You and all of your students are.
Yeah, they're great.
Really.
So something that I always ask, and this is a question in the middle of my list here, is describe a typical day for you. And maybe you don't have a typical day, just kind of the vibe I'm getting from what you do for a career. You might not have a typical day, and I think that's all right too. But what's a typical day like for you?
Okay, I'm gonna try and do this kind of compressed, but I actually would like to compare like what a day was like as a teacher, what a day was like in healthcare, and what a day is like as an entrepreneur now, right? So as a teacher, my day looked like get up at 5, work out maybe if I had some time, and shower and get dressed and go to school to start running before school programs by 6 or 6:30 in the morning, start teaching at 7:30 or 8, go through the day of 7 or 8 periods of teaching, usually back to back to back to back, because of scheduling for phy ed and health teachers usually is kind of strange, and you get different breaks than any other kind of content teacher. Going from that directly into teaching or coaching or running after school programs. After that, go home, lesson plan, do whatever I need to do for my students late at night. Take care of managing any other projects I was working on, get to bed hopefully by midnight, and repeat the next day. Right. So several years of sleeping for 3 to 4 hours at night. And I ran summer school programs. So it was similar all year round for me. I shifted into healthcare, and my day looked like wake up and work out, get ready, because it was ultra professional business attire every day. So I couldn't roll in with tennis shoes and leggings and a nice shirt like I would for teaching. It was like, get your heels and your dress pants, or, everything, and a nice blazer or a jacket of some sort. Start with meetings in the morning, which usually look like a stand-up meeting with the hospital administration team. You get 1 minute to share what you've got going on for the week, and then you move on to the next person. From that, I would transition. Oh, yeah.
Can I pause you for a second? Does a stand-up meeting literally mean you're standing up? You're not at a desk? Is that what that means?
So there'd be 15 of us standing in a circle, and it was just a quick whip. So we'd start with the CEO, and then 1 minute for each person, and then we were done. I'd go from that into a population health team meeting, which looked like 15 to 20 people from a different department within the hospital. So it was a physician and myself that led the team. Population health is the term, and that's like the next phase of healthcare. If anyone is really interested in healthcare innovation, population health is that. We would do an hour or 2 of population health strategy and looking at numbers inside of the hospital and clinic system and numbers out in the community with public health. From there, I would usually end up doing some kind of grant reporting, grant management, project management work. And then usually my afternoons were spent facilitating community activities or out in the community with people, actually creating change instead of being at a desk or in the building, because we know health doesn't happen in a healthcare building. So most of my work was out in the community. And then after that, I go home and that was it. So very, very, very different than being in the world of education. Now as an entrepreneur, I've set my days up to be whatever best serves me. So I get up at 6, I walk 3 or 4 miles, I do yoga or lift weights, I have celery juice or tea, I shower, and then at 9 o'clock, usually 9 o'clock is the earliest that I ever open my computer. because I know that it's not good for me before that, right? So 9 o'clock is usually when I get on any kind of technological device. And every hour, like I time myself, I'm not usually at my computer for more than 60 minutes before I get up and go for another walk, or I go sit outside in the sun or whatever, right? So the day right now, I get way more work done than I've ever done before, even though I'm working fewer hours than ever before, because I'm taking care of myself. And I have these benign boundaries set for myself to say, right now, technology is off limits. If somebody calls me, it doesn't matter, because I'm taking care of me and my business right now. So it's a very, very, very different world. But I also, like last night, I helped someone with I have a client that does an online auction on Instagram Live. So I run an online auction from 7 to 10 p.m. on Thursday nights. So I have the life of an entrepreneur. Sometimes you're working in the middle of the night, but the next day you take the whole day off.
Or have a conversation with somebody from college to help them out in their health career class.
That's right. Yeah. Yesterday I did a podcast with someone from South Africa in the morning, right? My clients are in the UK, California, Poland, all over the world. So completely different right now than ever before.
Huh. That's awesome. I appreciate that a lot. Next question on my list, and this really came from Dr. Larson's stress management class. I don't remember what the name of that class. It might have just been stress management. But
I think so.
I don't know if you'll remember this or not, but there was a parable called "Who Moved My Cheese?"
Yes.
And that showed up in this. We use the healthcare core curriculum. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that at all, but it comes from the MinForce project, and it's been a good resource for me to plan lessons when we're not doing guest speaker stuff and when we're not having conversations with health professionals. But anyways, that's what we started with this year. And so I had kids. We just watched the YouTube video. It's like a 15-minute video, but it's all about change, right? And how different people respond to change, and how if you really unpack it, you can let change or differences be a really positive thing in your life. The reason we started with it is probably obvious, but we're in the middle of something that's completely different than what we're used to. And I think there's a lot of people that are like Hem and Haw right now. Hem and Haw are two of the mice, and they're two of the characters that just say, this change is awful and it stinks and it's not good for us. But then there's Scurry and what's the other mouse's name? There's another one, Scurry, and they just go out into the maze and they make the best of it and they find the cheese first. So I'm giving you way more explanation than I probably need to here, but I'm just curious to know how you've handled change in your life, and just based on your career journey, you've gone through a lot of different things. So can you describe your approach to change in general, and then how it's made you a better person and kind of defined your vocational journey there?
Yeah. So number one, I would say that I am a change agent. I recognize that nothing in life is stagnant. Change is the only norm. So if you think about that, like if you want to live and thrive, you have to love change. Doesn't matter from one millisecond to the next, you yourself are changing. Everything in the world around you is changing. So you've got to be flexible and adapt and have fun with it. And when I talked earlier about the dissatisfaction with systems, I think humans set these systems up to serve other humans, but the systems weren't set up to be flexible and adaptable and dynamic. They were set up to be very robotic and reflective of the industrial era in which they were established, which was very much about manufacturing, processing, making sure everything is uniformed, everything fits inside of a box, and it's clean and nice and tidy. But again, that's not how humans are. That's not how we think or learn or live. So I guess going a little bit more into the whole idea of my vocation is about change and disruption. And not because I'm an angry person who hates what's going on in the world. It's because I'm I'm a content, happy person full of joy that sees an opportunity for other people to experience joy as they change and grow also. So my whole perspective on life and my vocational journey and mission is to help teach other people and help facilitate change processes, whether it's for you as an individual human or it's for an organization or a whole system within the government or business. That's what I do. I believe that my purpose and my passion in life is about how we experience change in a joyful way together, instead of me inflicting change on you and you inflicting change on me. Change is normal, so let's grow together, instead of the perspective and context of negative pain and all this other stuff. If that's how you're experiencing change, then it's not healthy. It's not really good. You have to be a part of it. Like you said before, you have to contribute and be part of it.
Contribute or contaminate. That's another basketball thing I used to talk to our kids about all the time. So you're either making yourself better or you're making yourself worse. Usually there's not any in between. If it's in between, you're contaminating. So we've talked a lot about vocation, and I'm not going to ask you more about vocation right now, but if you, because the next question on my list says to ask about vocational journey, and we've talked a lot about that, but if you could give some advice to these high school kids and kind of unpack the whole concept of vocation, just because I think you have a really strong sense of vocation, how would you unpack that for a kid who's 16 or 17 years old and hasn't really thought about vocation or passion, or maybe they've thought about a job or a career, but how would you help them flip that switch to thinking about vocation?
So I think about a job as something that you do to earn a stipend, right? A job is something that you sometimes have to do. You don't necessarily want to do it, but it's an opportunity to get ahead financially or with some other kind of benefit in that sense. But a vocation is what fuels your fire, right? It's usually something a little bit outside of the box. People usually, once you've found your vocational passion, people usually kind of look at you like, what do you do? What do you like to do? That doesn't make sense because it doesn't fit in the box of I'm a teacher, or if it doesn't fit inside of the box of I'm a nurse, right? It's like, especially in like smaller communities, it's like you're a teacher, you're a nurse, you're a farmer, you're a pastor, you're a doctor, and beyond that, or a business person, beyond that, we don't really know. If somebody says I'm an entrepreneur, like, I don't know what that means. Or I do change. Look at like you for a perfect example, Mr. Jacobs. You're not just a teacher, right? Every single year that you go to teach and coach, you're thinking about how can I change the way that I taught last year? How can I make it better for the kids? So I don't call that a teacher, I call that an educator. You're there to facilitate growth and change. So you're a change agent and a disruptor. So a job is about a stipend, something that you get some benefit out of, but a vocation is what brings meaning and drive to the whole rest of your life.
Yeah, I think that's great, and I'm trying to have these conversations with high school kids and get them to start to think. It's just a initiating thought to think about what they're passionate about, rather than just, because we talk a lot about college and career, and you're right about things feeling like they need to fit in a nice, neat box, and that's really not how life works. That's not the path you've taken. That's not the path I've taken. Especially in the last year, I've had quite the journey going from Princeton to Mankato back to Princeton, and I've purchased 2 homes, and I've moved twice, and I've had 3 different jobs in 3 years, really. So, I appreciate that. And, I've learned a tremendous amount. And all things considered, I'm awfully thankful that Princeton was able to say, why don't you come back here and we'll see if we can make something work. It's been a great fit, and it was a great fit before, but I'm glad I had the experience to go hang out in southern Minnesota, and I'm just calling it a sabbatical for now, really, because I had a different experience a year ago.
Yeah.
Another question on my list here, and I know you mentioned some people that also mentored me, but I like asking people about mentorship and people that have mentored you. So if you could, touch on one or two people, and I know you mentioned Dr. Banks and Dr. Ryman, who also mentored me, but if you could talk about someone else, or if you want to talk more about those two, that'd be great.
Yeah, I have two others that, I have tons of mentors, right? I had a mentor who always said, at any point in your life, you should have a mentor, a coach, and a corner person. Those three people all the time. Your corner person is like your best friend, one of your parents, that kind of person that's always got your back. A coach is someone who's helping you learn skills and strategy, and a mentor is someone who's helping guide you through life. One of those, like one person could do all three of those things, but I always thought that was a really kind of interesting thing to think about. If you got those three people around you all the time, you'll fall down. But when you fail and make mistakes and have tough times in your life, you've got the people to help you move through it. So number one, I'd say Dr. Mario Martinez. I've been working with him for 4 or 5 years. I started out in like formal mentorship programs with him, and he's the founder of biocognitive science, aka looking at how our beliefs and the way that culture around us impacts how we think, and the way that those thoughts impact our physiology, biology, endocrinology, et cetera, et cetera. So his work, I think, has been the most profound in my life. And I always tell him, I thank him and say the rest of my life is dedicated to growing biocognition and mind-body science, because everything that every human does impacts the biology of who we are and how humanity evolves in the future. So he's definitely one of the most important. And I would also say last year, my high school students read his book, Mind Body Code. So if any of you are intrigued in that kind of work, it's an excellent book. Every chapter is broken down with techniques where you actually go through like self-healing and growth processes. So it's really cool. And then another coach and mentor that I had, his name's Gary Grahn. And I met him when I was in 8th grade. And I started training with him in his garage gym on Sunday nights. He was in a different school district, so I would drive up to his house in Atwater, and I'd work out with the senior high boys from ACGC. And it was super, super intimidating, but it was like a community that Gary put together of elite athletes, but more important, just elite people, right? People that, even though we were 14, 15, 16, 17, we were dedicated to growing ourselves. So we weren't just there to train for sports. We ended up becoming like a little family. And to this day, like Gary's someone that my husband and I actually met in his gym. We asked him to pray at our wedding. Like he's that kind of foundational in how we developed and transitioned from adolescence into adulthood. But he just has really super simple things that are so profound in my mind. Like whatever you're doing in life, make sure it's got the effect and the impact you want. And it was a metaphor for training. Are you right? If we're lifting weights tonight, are you training to compete? Are you training for life? Whatever it is, make sure that you're training for the impact and the effect that you need to go do what you want to do. And what a simple but important metaphor that is applicable to everything in life.
Yeah, I love the mentor, coach, and corner person. I love that. I love that terminology. I love the concept because everybody's got an inner circle, right? But I've never really thought about like thinking about who my mentor would be, who my coach would be, and who my corner person would be. I think those are. I like that.
And like that triangle around you, and it shifts and moves.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have debated keeping this question on the list and asking this question because personally I kind of hate this question, especially because of my journey in the last year. But I do think there's some learning that happens when you ask people where they think or where they see themselves in X amount of time, right? So this is another classic job interview question, but where do you see yourself in 1 year, in 5 years, in 10 years? Where do you see yourself?
I see myself just what I've learned in the last couple of years. And again, this is a lot of learning that I've done with Dr. Martinez, but I don't see myself in a specific space and position and job. I see myself being more me. So very, very like philosophical, esoteric kind of answer here, but I don't really care where I end up geographically. I don't care what I end up doing as long as I continue to be more myself, more authentic in the world, and giving more of what I want to give. So that's where I hope to go. Instead of being in places where I feel like I'm obligated, where I'm shamed or I'm blamed or I'm forced into something, I want it to be authentic from me as a healthy, healed human being.
I'm just thinking about the questions I'm gonna get from high school kids when we watch this, because I have them fill out a reflection sheet, and there's 2 questions on there. It says job title and job description, and I already know I'm gonna get a kid that says, what do we write for Sam's job title and job description? And I might just say she is herself. That is her job. She's becoming herself, and her job description is going to be progress and change.
Yes.
Like, seriously, I think that's awesome that's where you're at, and I just think there's a tremendous amount that kids can learn from something like that, right? Because I think it's going to be easier for the gal I talked to yesterday. Her name was Dawn, and she was the director of imaging at Fairview, and that's great. And she had some great advice and some great perspective for kids, but it fit into a nice, neat box, and it's an easy answer to say, here's what my job is, here's my job description. But your job isn't out there on EdPost, Sam. So I think it's awesome. I can't see a job summary or anything like that, and I love it.
Yeah.
If you could give some of these high school kids some advice, whether they're going to pursue a health career or not, what do you think these high school kids should hear about college, career, life? What parting advice do you want to give them?
I'm going to offer the invitation to please, please, please consider doing things differently. So if you're inspired by a nurse or a physician that you know right now because you love how they take care of other people in a healthcare setting, if you want to go be a doctor or a nurse, learn what they did really, really well, but then infuse it with something even better. So it goes back to that whole change versus stagnancy. As a teacher, being challenged to go into education, not doing what I experienced with my educators and my teachers, right? So please, whatever you do in the world, take the best of what you've experienced and what you've learned, but create a hybrid and bring in more of who you are and make it different, make it new, and keep it all about experiential, kind of hands-on purpose and passion. That's my takeaway. Make it different, make it better.
I was just reminded, and anytime I can make a connection back to someone else we've talked to, I try to do that. And we talked to this guy named Tanner Neubauer, who is a healthcare administrator and has, he has a similar passion to you and has a similar sense of vocation. And so I really appreciate talking to people like him and talking to people like you. But he said his advice was, focus more on who you are and who you want to be, not what you want to do. So kind of a similar way of thinking. If you want to be a doctor, that's great, but focus on the person you need to be to get to that point. And for him, he was really unsure of what he wanted to do. He knew he kind of wanted to work in healthcare. And his journey was more about self-discovery, kind of like your journey is. And so I think that's great.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think I would also just kind of stress the importance of not forgetting about the whole collaborative healthcare system. So when I was working in the hospital, I'll never forget being in meetings about pay compensation and benefits for doctors and nurse practitioners and nurses. But I also was really close with dietary staff and environmental services, custodians and stuff like that. And I'll never forget when there was somebody that I got really close to who was a custodian. He was part of the environmental services team who had to leave because he wasn't paid enough to make a living. He couldn't buy food and pay for rent anymore, even though he was a custodian within the hospital. So we had this incredibly enormous pay disparity. And I think without that team, like when that team was short, or when the dietary services in the kitchen, when their staff was short, the building couldn't function and run. So if you're going to be a healthcare administrator, please keep those people in mind. If you don't want to be a doctor or a nurse, but you love healthcare, remember that you can contribute in those roles too, right? Like the sanitation and the cleanliness and the orderliness of healthcare comes from all these different teams working together. So healthcare is so far beyond being a doctor and a nurse. And you can be in public health, you can be in your own private practice, it doesn't matter. So stretch beyond what you know as normal healthcare.
Yeah, I love that. So one more chat pack question here. Yes. And I don't know how I pulled the same one. There's 250 of them in here, but I think it's a good one. I asked this one yesterday to Dawn. If you could bring back any tradition that seems to have faded into the past, what tradition or fad or trend would you like to bring back?
Oh my gosh. This is going to be so random. I don't know why this is what came to my head, but I would bring back roller skates and rollerblades.
Yeah, I see rollerblades making a little bit of a comeback. When I was in Mankato last year, I lived really close to campus, and there were people rollerblading all the time.
I love it. I never ever forget in elementary and middle school, every Friday night at BLH was roller skating night. The high schoolers would come and play their boom boxes, and we would roller skate for 4 or 5 hours.
Yes, there's a roller skating rink in Princeton. It's called Thunderblades.
Yes, that's what I would bring back.
I love it. All right, Sam, I'm going to stop recording here. So, again, I really, really appreciate your willingness to come on here and talk to us. And I'm excited to have a conversation with some of the kids when we watch this.
Good. Thank you very much. And to your students, just you've heard the message before, but stay true to yourself. Don't fall into the systems and the expectations of what our culture and society want you to do or expect you to do. You'll get sick instead of being healthy and thriving. So find your path and stick to it, even if it's uncomfortable some days.
You're the best.
Yeah. Thank you.